Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections continues. We're interviewing Tom Nelson of Madison. He's a Libertarian candidate for Attorney General. Tom, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you very much, Steve.
And a programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. First-time candidate, Mr. Nelson?
Yes, it is.
Then give us your short version of your background, sir. Who is Tom Nelson?
I'll make it short. I'm a lawyer. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm in my 40th year of law practice. I'm not retired, but I have cut my practice down. I still take cases. I'm certified at all levels by the state public defender. I do trial and appellate work, and my practice is primarily limited to criminal defense.
Criminal defense. Well, why are you a libertarian? My next question is why run for Attorney General? But let's focus on why are you a libertarian first.
I'm a libertarian not because I found the Libertarian Party and decided to join it, but because I was born a libertarian, and when I found the Libertarian Party, I could have invented it myself. Because, let me show you something, I take this around with me everywhere. Because this is the problem that's wrong with the world today. It's what's wrong with Wisconsin. It's what's wrong with the United States. There's just too damn much government everywhere.
Wow.
And our basic platform is less government, more freedom. And this year, the Libertarian Party in Wisconsin is running a full slate. When you get into that little election booth and you look at your ballot, it'll say Democrats, Republicans, and a whole column of Libertarians, and there's one for every office. We ask that you vote for them. We promise change. We promise principle instead of rhetoric, and responsibility instead of handouts.
Well, Tom, this is fascinating. If you believe in less government, that sign says too much government. You don't have to get out again. Don't get it out again.
But I intend to.
You want to run the State Department of Justice. Would you then prune it back, sir? And if so, what services or programs would you cut?
Well, there are problems with that question that are specific to the Attorney General position, in that it's not a lawmaking and it is not a policy-making office. The Attorney General is the manager of the law firm that serves the state government, primarily the executive branch. Legislators also consult with the Attorney General's office. The judiciary, never, because the Attorney General goes into court as the attorney for the state entity representing him as a party litigant. So you have the executive and the legislative branches, and you give them advice. You don't tell them what to do. When someone asks, what's your position on this issue and that, the correct answer, and I have seen these interviews and people are thinking, what does somebody want to hear? What do my constituents want to hear? Those aren't the correct answers. The correct answer is you pick up the phone, you call the governor, whoever he or she is, and you say, what are we doing on this? And then you do good, hard, aggressive legal work for them. That's what you have to do. Now, there are areas in which I think there is too much government, and there are areas in which the Attorney General, as the manager of this rather large law firm, the Attorney General's office, could have something to contribute. And some of these things are, we create too many felons in this state. You know, it's the judicial process that creates felons. I mean 17-year-old kids stamped as felons, losing their Second Amendment rights for life because they made a mistake and stole something out of somebody's car. Or a tragic case I had once. Kid broke into the school and stole some ice cream bars out of the ice cream bar machine and rather damaged the machine. Now he's a felon. And there are ways, in some cases with diligent work, to get expungements on those. But I would try to cut back this hunting dog, bloodhound drive to make felons out of as many citizens in the state as we can. It's overdone. The other thing is they're going for way too long sentences. We have too many people doing long sentences in prison, and it's expensive. The state of Minnesota has, the state of Wisconsin has 107% of the population of the state of Minnesota. we have 230% the number of people in prison. And I'm just talking about the state prisons as they have in Minnesota. We're doing something wrong, they're doing something right. And to the extent the AG can participate with the legislative and executive branches, I'd like to work on that. And as you hear all the time, there are way too many black people, way too many African Americans in prison relative to the other people. We need to find out why. Have I answered your question?
Yeah, well, yes, you have, but we need more context. So, as you said, the Attorney General does not make the laws. So you would recommend laws then that would not, what laws would you recommend to change our three strikes law, which it sounds like you're an opponent of? And do you believe that we have too many people incarcerated serving hard time for victimless crimes? Tom?
Let me take the second part of that first, Steve. Yes, too many people serving for victimless crimes and too many for nonviolent crimes. There are a lot of crimes that are crimes because in the good wisdom of the legislature they were made so. Mm-hmm. Those should be dealt with as one category. You broke a rule. We've got a legal term for that, malum prohibitum. It's bad because it's prohibited. And on the other side, we have a category of crimes we call malum in se. That's evil in itself. Anytime there's a victim, anytime there's violence, you've got a malum in se. We don't make a sufficient distinction between these bad guys who have hurt people need to be locked up for a long time. I remember Jeffrey Dahmer. He got 17 consecutive life sentences. I don't think that was excessive. The idea was simply, he didn't get 17 lifetimes to go with him, but the idea was you're not going to get out of prison because you're really, really dangerous. You're a really terrible person.
Do you see the job as Attorney General to lead a proactive campaign to change some of these laws? And would you repeatedly be going up to the lawmakers in the Senate and the Assembly and ask them to change some of these laws? So how much proactivity do you see ascribed to the Attorney General's office?
I don't see the AG office as an appropriate place for lobbying. I've never done lobbying, and I would not be actively doing that. Okay. I would be hoping for a politically consonant governor, and there are a couple of guys running for that office.
Well, there's a libertarian candidate,
Bob
Mr.
Burke.
We're going to be interviewing him here within the next couple of weeks. Excuse me for interrupting.
He would be an excellent choice for governor. Let me say that right now, and don't get him confused with Mary Burke. She would be a terrible choice for governor. Okay.
Well,
even though they have the same last names, and I understand they're not related.
And Mary Burke would be terrible. What about the incumbent?
Scott Walker?
Yes.
I like Scott.
Okay.
I think he's highly competent, and he gets a lot of criticism for his politics. He doesn't get criticized for not being competent. I think he's a good governor, and I like Tommy Thompson. I did not like Doyle, Mr. James Doyle. Okay.
But we got off the subject.
Where were we? Exactly.
Well, you don't see the job as Attorney General lobbying. But you believe that there's a disparity and our laws are putting people in prison. Well, for a concrete example, someone convicted the second or third time for selling marijuana. Victimless crime, maybe. Is it?
Questionable.
Questionable.
I said that once to
she or he be in prison?
I said that once in court, in Judge Mangerson's courtroom, and he said, no, it isn't. The whole society is a victim. So that's the other position. And I think people generally do suffer from the drug laws. Okay. And they suffer a lot from the immense amount of money the government taxes and spends fighting trivial little drug cases. But you said second and third time.
Yes.
These are people who didn't learn, and they have to be dealt with more strictly.
Let me ask the question this way. Who should be released from the prisons because it is unfair to hold them for that crime for that period of time, Tom?
People who haven't harmed anyone, people who have done a sufficient amount of time to teach those who are capable of learning not to commit crimes, not to commit crimes. People who have demonstrated that they haven't learned should be kept in. Anyone who hurts somebody should do a lot of time in prison. There are 4 different reasons we put people in prison, to restrain them, to rehabilitate them for retribution, and also to set an example. And people who have hurt other people should go to prison for a long time because that keeps them where they can't hurt anybody except another prisoner or, unfortunately, sometimes a prison guard. It protects the public. The number one reason we lock people up in prisons and keep them there is to protect the public. So we look at the public. We look at the guy. They do psychological profiling. We look at his personality. We look at his criminal history and what he's done and decide how big a danger will he be. And if he's not a really big danger, we don't have to keep him in prison a really long time. We spend $1.2 billion just running state prisons in this state. Over in Minnesota, I remember saying this wrong once, they spend about $800 million.
Yeah, and
I hope I have those numbers right. That they don't sound exactly right to me, but we spend much, much more money, and I'd like to see that come down.
Last week, I debated the Republican candidate for attorney. I'm sorry, debated is the wrong term. I interviewed Mr. Schimmel. This Thursday, I'm interviewing the Democratic candidate, Susan Happ. A big issue between them is this question, Tom, and I want to ask you.
Okay.
If you're the Attorney General and you believe that the legislature is on track to pass something that is unconstitutional, do you have a duty to, and it's signed into law, do you believe the Attorney General has a duty to defend it in court?
You're raising a classic problem, usually in the context of ethics, in which the client wants to do something illegal and he asks your advice to help him. And the answer is no.
So you would not?
You do not.
Well,
I mean, they pass a law that says nobody can write a letter to the editor of the paper without the censor approving it. Absolutely not.
But here's where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
It's been a privilege for Wisconsin to cover some of the major policy decisions of the last 3 and 4 years. Would you have defended Act 10 in court?
I would have defended Act 10, first because your client, again, is the executive branch of government and the legislative branch, and you do what your clients do unless it's illegal, dishonest, or unethical, and I don't see where it was.
Okay.
And I've been vindicated. I have been vindicated. If I had defended it, I would have been vindicated because the state's courts also said, yes, that law's all right.
Would you have defended photo ID to vote, Tom?
I would defend something like that would prevent, you know the old saying, vote early and often. We've got to have some control on who votes, and we don't, for example, allow felons that are under supervision to vote and so on. That's got to be controlled. And how often and how many times. We've got to prevent voter fraud. And I certainly don't want to put any kind of a burden, as a libertarian especially. I mean, we are entirely in favor of democratic republic, which can only function if people vote fairly. But what I don't see in the anti-voter ID faction is a solution to the problem. So do what? Just let everybody drive around town and vote as many times as he wants to? I haven't heard them say that, but I haven't heard them propose anything that'll prevent it. So let's have some good ideas here that accomplish two goals. Everyone can conveniently vote, and we're going to prevent people from voting more than once.
Okay.
I put that to legislators and to the public. Solve the problem.
So we're 2 for 2. Those are 2 you would have defended as Attorney General.
Okay.
What about the law that says that abortion providers must have hospital admitting procedures within a radius of X amount of miles?
If that's a law that is honestly proposed to protect the safety and health of women or babies, and I mean they're in good faith on this, and it's done under the advice and expertise of the medical profession, because they're the ones who know how important this is and how necessary it is, I would defend a reasonable law in that direction. If it's like the last Texas law, which a federal judge suspended just last week, pendem to lita, until they're done litigating over it, and it's a sneaky backdoor scam to prevent abortions, then I'm opposed to it. Okay? This requires...
Well, finish that thought. If you're opposed to it, then you as Attorney General would not choose to defend the law and recommend outside counsel to defend what was legally enacted?
If the governor told me to do a job, I would do the job.
You would do the
I
job.
don't think, if you're asking me how much conflict am I going to get into my client, my answer is as little as possible. I would hope to have a sympathetic governor and we'd work together on that. If he says, look, here's your job, I'm the client and I say do this, I think it's an unwise defense. We're going to get clobbered in federal court, maybe, but still that's your job. And this isn't a promise I'm making to voters. It's an obligation I have as a licensed attorney in the state. I'll do what my client says. Unless it's, again, definitely against the law, clearly illegal.
Just two more examples. Looking back on the history of the major policy decisions made in the last 3 years, would you have defended the domestic partnership law signed by Governor Doyle in 09 or 10?
Well, this gives me an opportunity to be a real libertarian. If two people want to live together, share expenses, combine their household, that's not the government's business. You remember the too much government thing?
It says.
What's the government doing?
Yes.
Telling people whom can get married and whom may not get married? That's nonsense. It's not a government question.
What about the constitutional amendment prohibiting same-sex marriage? Would you have defended that?
I would be opposed to it on the same grounds. Now, when you say that, it's not
personally you're opposed,
not legal.
But if you were put on your Attorney General hat, would you have defended it in court?
If it's once passed, oh boy, if it's once passed, you have to enforce the laws that exist. Okay. I can disagree with the law and defend it. There are criminal defenses I don't entirely agree with, but I exert them vigorously for my client. You see that most political offices don't have that, and the other candidates have not shown a sensitivity to it. You are torn between what you are, as a political candidate, want to accomplish and what you think is good for everybody and what will get you votes, and your obligations as counsel for the government and specifically the executive branch of government. And that's a dilemma. Okay, you're locked in the horns there, and you have to exercise judgment. There's got to be sound judgment, no running to one extreme position or the other.
Right.
And you have to obey the law and the ethical requirements of the profession. And I would try to walk that line, okay?
3 years ago, the legislature and Governor Walker told the Department of Justice to administer our new concealed carry law. Would you have felt comfortable implementing that law and running it? Because now we have hundreds of thousands of people who have legal concealed weapons permits in Wisconsin.
Yes.
Would you have had a problem with that law?
And I'm one of those people, and my wife is another, and my son is another.
You have those permits?
Yes, we went down and got them. I don't know why I've never walked out the door with a concealed weapon. It was just, oh good, somebody has read the Second Amendment and understands what it says. Yeah, I'd be wholeheartedly, individually and professional, behind running that, and I'd be careful to make sure they weren't getting outside of the law and putting too many restrictions on it. I think they're doing a good job. Someone, I think it was Susan Happ, said in the course of the class people are required to take, I wasn't required to take the class because I'm a military veteran, but my wife and son took it. And in the course of taking that class, they should have to go to a range and demonstrate some proficiency in shooting the gun and in handling it safely. I think that's all right, too.
Okay.
And I mean, enthusiastic gun owners, shooters, target shooters, and hunters are highly proficient at handling their firearms. They don't hurt people, and they don't mind demonstrating it. Here's how you load it. Here's how you unload it.
Very soon, one other example, very real example, passed by our legislature, signed by the governor. Very soon, there'll be more expansive DNA testing, and that'll be conducted by the Department of Justice. Would you have been ready to implement that one, sir?
That's an interesting question. There are many analogies, and this is a whole new area of law. You know, you can have your fingerprint. I've been fingerprinted just so that I could practice law in this state. I was fingerprinted when I was drafted. And your DNA is a fingerprint. It tells everybody who you are, right down to the one individual person.
Yes.
And you leave fingerprints all over the place when you go somewhere. I've left some on this cup.
Which we will not test, by the way. Go ahead.
Oh. And you leave your DNA all over the place, too. The thing is, decoding the DNA, and they call it sequencing, to identify the individual is a very complex biochemical process that has to be done in a laboratory. Fingerprints, you can blow a little talcum powder on there and look at them with a magnifying glass. So are we going to bring this laboratory examination in to look at your DNA? And there's another issue here. fingerprints only tell who you are. Your DNA tells a lot of things about you. Your race, what kind of susceptibilities you might have to diseases.
Genetic disease.
And if you have birth defects and so on. And that's private medical stuff. So I think, again, we've got to make a distinction here, and we've got to cover both interests. Use it as much as possible for identifying criminals or suspects. Don't pry into people's most personal thing, the genetics that constructs them. You remember Thomas Henry Huxley said, genes are the difference between a man and a carrot. And it's literally true. So can we do it without prying in? Can we get this DNA? And this is something, again, you've got to get the scientific expertise in. Everybody on the street corner has an opinion, but he doesn't know anything about the subject, you know. Can we get the scientific method in to say, we can take a DNA sample and get the information that identifies the individual and nothing else? Then I'm for using that fairly broadly, but I'm sure not for... My birth certificate has a footprint of my little baby foot for identity, because new babies don't have fingerprints yet. I don't want to take DNA samples at birth and keep track of everyone like that. Too much Orwellian risk and danger in that.
Many people, when referring to the Attorney General, use the term top cop. Are you comfortable with that term, Tom?
Absolutely not. It's a silly moniker.
Okay.
Cops are cops and lawyers are lawyers. There's a fascination with that, I think, because it sounds macho, and it's a cute thing to say in an election campaign, and it alliterates so nicely, top and cop. Police go out in the street and they investigate and they find evidence. It's one of their functions. The other one is when muscle is necessary out in the street. They're the guys who have undertaken to provide it, and they're trained and armed to do that. Your lawyer, including your attorney general, goes into courtroom representing the government entity and argues cases with them. Mm-hmm. Let's don't get that confused. No, the prosecutors are not cops and cops are not prosecutors. They are teammates, and anytime teammates are working together, you know there's no I in team. You do your job and work in complement with the other guy, and together you get the whole job done. So,
the other two candidates, Mr. Schimmel and Ms. Happ, have a platform. I'm sorry, they have ideas on how to fight the growing problem of heroin abuse in Wisconsin. Do you, sir?
Well, yes, vigorously. Heroin is an absolute horror story, and heroin is the result of the government's regulation on drugs. You know why heroin exists? Heroin exists because it's so small and compact that it's easy to smuggle. Opium is harvested, used to be in Turkey just about all the time. Now there's a lot of it grown in Afghanistan and in other places. It's cooked down into morphine right in the field. You can do this under the stars in an iron pot. The morphine is greatly reduced in volume, but it has all the active ingredient. It goes to a lab for a many-stage complex chemical process that reduces it to heroin. A tiny, tiny bit of heroin contains the output of acres of opium poppies, and that gets smuggled. If we could adopt a more enlightened, and again, get some scientific advice on this, and a more enlightened philosophy toward drugs where there was more regulation and taxing, especially on the lighter drugs, and less absolute iron-fisted prohibition, I think the heroin problem would abate. Probably wouldn't go away completely, because some people, I suppose, are determined to get their heroin. It's the bad drug. It's a drug that kills people and makes them crazy. We should be doing everything we can to reduce heroin use, even if it means lightening up on penalties or proscription of some other drugs. Well, and that brings us to medical marijuana, doesn't it?
Yes, and here's my question.
Okay.
There will be a bill introduced. There was last session, and there will be one next session, medical marijuana. If you're asked to testify before a committee to public hearing, what testimony would you offer as Attorney General on medical marijuana, Tom?
What would I know about it as Attorney General? I could tell them what the laws are and what the enforcement experience has been. If they want my opinion on what the policy should be, I would say, first, medical morphine is legal, used routinely, medical codeine, hydrocodone, OxyContin, long lists of prescribed controlled drugs that are used by licensed physicians to treat their patients. What is the thing about marijuana? Is it a superstition? or THC, let's say, medical
Yes.
use of tetrahydrocannabinol.
Yeah.
Why is it distinguished? Okay, that brings up the very legitimate concern that if it's legalized for medical use, somehow it won't be regulated correctly and everybody will be using it because it'll be so easy to get a prescription. And if that's the problem, the solution is to make the prescribing process work. It works for morphine and codeine and these other scheduled drugs. You go to a genuine, competent, good faith, licensed physician. He says you've got a malady, or maybe it's just pain. He writes you a prescription. It's all legal and above board, and you take your medicine. Why can't marijuana be treated the same way? So I think the problem's being defined wrongly.
And if a state senator at that same public hearing said, while you're here, Mr. Attorney General, what is your position on recreational use of marijuana, given the examples of Colorado and the state of Washington? How would you answer, sir?
Colorado and Washington State are excellent examples because they have become the petri dish in the laboratory. By that I mean the other 48 states can watch them and see what happens. And it's always good to you know, when the pond's frozen and your kid says, is it safe to walk out on there? And you tell them, wait until some of the other boys walk out and we'll see. And that's what we're doing here. Note also, interestingly, and I don't know all the reasons for this, Alaska at one time legaled marijuana for personal use in small amounts, and they repealed that law. I don't know why. Maybe I should, so I can field a question like this better. But again, good judgment and regulation, and if marijuana supplants cocaine, crack, and heroin, it could have a very constructive result. It's got to be done right.
Okay.
It's got to be done right. You've got to get the right scientific consultation, and you've got to get that, including psychiatric, because a lot of people who turn to drugs have got severe mental problems, and you've got to get some experience with it. But for the time being, absolutely, let's watch the experiment going on across the country.
We get the
benefit of everything we can learn, and we're not risking anything.
Okay. We're running short on time, so my question is, what grades would you give Mr. Van Hollen as Attorney General? He's finishing up his 8th year, 2 terms.
I like Mr. Van Hollen just fine. I think he's been a good lawyer in the job. He hasn't been an outright strong advocate of his own positions, and I consider that a plus. I also like it when you read his web page and he says he's a voracious reader, because I too am a hardcore bookworm, and that's why I went to law school. He said you get to go to a school where all you do is study books all the time. Well, that's what I wanted to do. Okay. He's done a pretty good job. He's fallen down in a couple of areas. One is there's a Department of Investigation in the Attorney General's office that's supposed to investigate possible crimes or something might have been criminal that goes across county lines, so a county would be disabled in handling it fully, and it needs to be handled at the state level, and that investigates possible government corruption. And we have had a couple of fine young men shot to death in the streets of Wisconsin. Michael Bell, Paul Heenan, I'm sure you recognize both of those names. And the police departments themselves investigate, and without exception, they say that's all right and there's not going to be a prosecution. Okay, well, that's their guy. That doesn't bother me. Remember, cops are not lawyers. What bothers me is when the district attorney says, well, if the police say hands off, we're going to let this homicide go uninvestigated and unprosecuted. That's wrong. And I fault Ismail Ozan severely for not bringing some kind of action in the Paul Heenan shooting. That homicide was absolutely indefensible, absolutely criminal. Now that's based on everything I've read in the news media and online. I haven't. Oh, and I have, and the complete full police report I have also read, and it's a trashy, paper-thin cover-up. The next thing is when the DA won't investigate, where's the Attorney General? This is where he tells his Department of Investigation, get into this, find out what happened. I want a full report, and I want an unbiased report. I want hard facts. Put it on my desk 2 weeks from now. And if I am elected Attorney General, by the way, that will happen in both those cases.
Okay, I have 2 more questions because we're almost out of time. The first one is the level of gun violence in Milwaukee, where you have a 10-year-old playing on a playground shot to death. Do you see that as part of the job description, fighting that as part of the job description for Attorney General, Tom?
The Attorney General is in the law enforcement function, and he should be doing everything he can as Attorney General
But you're uncomfortable with the term
to prevent
top.
that happening.
But you just said you're uncomfortable with the term top cop, so I'm trying to reconcile that. sir.
I think the cops in the state are uncomfortable with that too. They're the ones who investigate and who use force. They're the muscle on the scene. I would not infringe on their job. Instead, I would give them every bit of support. It's, as you can see, I don't like people being shot to death. It's absolutely unacceptable that this happens in the city. We need to find ways, but fast, politically malleable solutions are not the answer. You have to find out what the cause is. What happened? Why were there people there with a gun? Why was somebody shooting at somebody? That's not a target range. When you shoot the gun, you're on a range or you're out in the field hunting. I think that's all. Or else the redcoats are coming to take your guns and you stand on Concord Bridge and start a revolution. That was another time when firearms were used, and I approve of that. Mm-hmm. So find out why the hell did this thing happen, and how are we going to prevent it from ever happening again?
And then my final question, because we are close to running out of time. Why are you a better choice for Attorney General for the voters on November 4 than Democrat Ms. Happ or Republican Waukesha County DA Brad Schimmel?
Because first, I bring a libertarian political philosophy to the office, which is a better, more honest and responsible political philosophy than either of the other candidates. I love to say Republicrat and the Demoplican, because those two parties are looking in a mirror at each other. There really is no difference between them. I was asked to run for this office, and I would like to get in and do a good, hard job at it. I have no ambition, politically or otherwise. And I think there's a good job to be done here. And some of this investigation of local governments covering up crimes, including homicides, really has to be brought to an end. But what I would want to do more than anything else
Closing remarks, sir.
Is to have a governor who says, "This is my AG. He's a good lawyer and he does good work for me," because that's what lawyers live on.
Thank you. Tom Nelson of Madison is a Libertarian candidate for Attorney General. Tom, thank you for visiting Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you very much, Steve, for asking me to come.
Thank you.